Open your Bibles up to Titus chapter 1. We're looking at verses 10 through 16 in this lesson, which is lesson 3, and it's our final section in this chapter. I'm reading out of the New International Version. This is how our passage reads. For there are many rebellious people, mere talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision group. They must be silenced because they're ruining entire households by teaching things they ought not to teach, and that for the sake of dishonest gain. Even one of their own prophets has said, Cretans are always liars, evil brutes, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true. Therefore, rebuke them sharply so that they will be sound in the faith and will pay no attention to Jewish myths or to the commands of those who reject the truth. To the pure, all things are pure. But to those who are corrupted and do not believe, nothing is pure. In fact, both their minds and consciences are corrupted. They claim to know God, but by their actions they deny Him. They are detestable, disobedient, and unfit for anything good. It's a rather large section, so we're going to have to move through it rather quickly. I'd like you to spend some time in this, not only on your own, but in your group, and discuss some of the details of this passage. Phenomenal truth here. We need to understand that by this time we're in the body of what Paul, the body of the letter of what Paul is instructing Titus concerning the groups here in Crete. He divides the churches into 6 groups. They're elders, older men, older women, younger men, younger women, slaves, which are, of course, the 6 groups. Elders, older men, older women, younger women, and slaves. Now what's interesting is he really inserts here verses 10 through 16, which is not a group. Okay? There are not 7 groups he divides the church in. There are 6 groups. Now, if you counted verses 10 through 16 and you say you called them the rebellious people, there'd be 7 groups. But you understand this is not a group in and of itself. And you can investigate that on your own and mull over that in your own thinking. Powerful truth going on in here. This is instructions for the elders on how to deal with this group right here. I want to walk through them with you. Basically, there's 4 movements in these verses. Okay, he begins to talk about the rebellious people, which is verse 10. Then he talks about their actions in verses 11 and 12. And along with their actions, you're going to get some more content about who they are. And then in verses 13 and 14, you learn about how Paul wants them to deal with the rebellious people. Of course, that's the rectification. And then verses 15 and 16 is the recompense, which is the benefits of dealing with these people. Let's look at the first one together. The first one, of course, is the identity of the rebellious people. At times the board's going to get really crowded, so you're going to have to write quickly. This is how this verse, the rebellious people, their identity is pretty much contained in verse 10. That's how verse 10 reads. For there are many rebellious people, mere talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision group. He talks about rebellious. He calls them rebellious people. The idea of rebellious is really neat because it's a compound word. Okay? It's made up actually of 2 words. The first word, if we were to translate it in English, it would mean above. Okay? It's the word above. The second word, is the word, we would translate it in kind of a phrase actually, to place in order. So rebellious literally means the idea is they are above being placed in order. They're above accountability. Okay? They are above being put in their place. What's really interesting, see there's 6 groups in the churches of Crete. They won't fit in a group. Okay? They won't fit in, they won't come under accountability. They're their own group. Okay? They're above being placed in order. It's a powerful idea, which is why he calls them rebellious people, and he doesn't place them in a group, because they won't be placed in a group. They're rebellious. Okay? He also calls them talkers. Okay? And what he means by talkers, it's trivial stuff. Okay? That's the idea of talkers. It's trivial. You might even talk about it as hollow. Okay? It's hollow. It's just empty words. It's really light. In the way they talk and the conversations that they have, especially probably alluding to their idea of how they talk about Him, it's light, it's trivial, it's hollow. He also says that they are deceivers. And this literally means it's a mind trick or a mind deception. I like the idea of the mind trick, okay? It's a deceiving mentally. They're trying to deceive us. There's their thought process. You see, they won't fit into a group, and they're idle talkers. It's just they say, hey, they talk about the same kind of things that everybody else talks about in the church. They probably talk about the same things that you and I talk about, but it's light. It's trivial. It doesn't mean much to them, and they're trying to deceive us. Okay? This is how he talks about this group. In verse 10, they're rebellious people. Now, that's the first explanation of this group. Okay? He defines them, they're rebellious people. Now, he moves into verses 11 and 12. And again, I know we're moving quickly, but a large section we kind of have to today. Okay? We have the rebellious people, and then we have the rebellious actions. All right? Which is in verses 11 and 12. Okay? Let me read that for us. They must be silenced because they are ruining whole households by teaching things they ought not to teach. And that for the sake of dishonest gain. Even one of their own prophets have said, Cretans are always liars, evil brutes, and lazy gluttons. Okay? Pretty strong language. Okay? Verses 11 and 12. The first thing he says about the rebellious people, and I don't know if we would categorize it as their actions, but it's how he wants, it's how Paul instructs Titus to instruct the elders to deal with this group. And of course he instructs Titus as well. But they are to be, we're going to put it up here, silenced. I got it confused there. They're to be silenced. And it was really interesting, the idea of this word is to put on a muzzle. Okay? It's to put on a muzzle. It's to keep their mouth shut. It's to shut them down, not let them talk, because they're polluting everything. And he says, first thing, hey, they have to be silenced. Why? Because they are ruining. Okay? And the idea of ruining is to upset or overturn. Interesting. It's to upset or overturn, which means everything that Paul has been teaching that's been coming to Titus, and again, Titus embracing the same kind of things that Paul is embracing, they're upsetting that. They're overturning that. They're tearing it all apart. They're ruining. And who are they ruining? Paul says in verse 11, they must be silenced because they are ruining whole households or entire households. I really like the idea of a household because it's a little bit bigger than what we might think it is. We think of household, we probably think of family. But it's bigger than just family. The idea of a household in their culture was carried with the idea of influence. Everyone under the influence of that household. See, all the servants, all the slaves, all the workers, hey, whatever you were, whoever was under the direct influence of this household is who he's talking about. That's the household, not just the family, it's everyone in relationship to that. And of course, the rebellious people, they have to be silenced because why? Well, they're ruining, they're upsetting, they're overturning the entire household, communities, even within the church. It's powerful. He goes on. They're ruining entire households, okay, by teaching things they ought not to teach. And then he adds on to this, and that for the sake of dishonest gain. Not too hard to probably understand what the idea of dishonest gain is. It's a distinctly inappropriate this is really interesting. It's an inappropriate conduct that's directed to a certain group in the church. For instance, if there was someone in the group that was misbehaving, okay, one of the six groups in the church, if there was a person that was in one of those 6 groups, okay, he was misbehaving, he was incorrect, he was falling out of line, they would apply this to him. And this is applied directly to the elders. Okay? This is a big no-no for the elders. Okay? It's a mishandling of, an inappropriate handling of finances. And it's something that's specifically directed to the elders. It's something that they would fall into. It's someone who, one of the 6 groups, of course the elders, who would fall into this. So this is a direct rebuke to an elder. Which is interesting because, see the rebellious people, they won't come under authority. They won't come into a group. They're above accountability. And they are doing things that elders do, and of course doing them in dishonest ways. So they're just free among themselves. They're not accountable. That's a big problem. Okay? So the things that they're doing for dishonest gain. He says they must be silenced because they are ruining entire households by teaching things they ought not to teach. And that for the sake of dishonest gain. Then he quotes one of their own prophets. He says, even one of their own prophets have said, Cretans, and he describes them in 3 ways. The prophet, see, not Paul. Cretans are always, and he says these things, liars, evil brutes, and lazy gluttons. Okay? He calls them liars, evil brutes, lazy gluttons. Really find it interesting in the idea of liars. John talks about it, and I'll let you look this up at a later time, in 1 John 2:22. And it's not how he defines liar or how he talks about a liar is not someone who just does not tell the truth. It is a direct dishonesty toward God. In fact, in 1 John, when he talks about the liar, he describes it, and I probably should just take the time, if just really quickly even, to read you this passage, 1 John, and I'll just read it to you. Chapter 2, verse 22, he says, who is the liar? Okay? Who is the liar? It is the man who denies that Jesus is the Christ. So it makes you think of, there's one particular liar, and perhaps there is, but who is that liar? It is the man who denies that Jesus is the Christ. So when he's talking about a liar, see, he's very, very specific. It's a direct violation of a relationship with Jesus Christ. This is who they are. Okay? Again, one of their actions, a liar, they are liars, but see, again, hey, that is not just a casual thing, not just a dishonest, not just not telling the truth, it is a direct violation, a pinpointed violation of Christ, their meaning to do so. He also says they're evil, which is the idea of wickedness, and on a side note, the idea of evil also is the word that he uses here, is a military term. It's those who retreat in battle, who run away from battle. It's almost a wimpy word, if you can look at it that way. But it's wickedness. And the idea of brutes literally is beasts. When Mark chapter 1 talks about Jesus going out in the wilderness to be tempted, he went out where the beasts were. Okay? This is how he talks about them. They are wicked. Okay? Wimpy, wicked men. Okay? Wicked and wimpy. And they are beasts. Beast, wicked beast, wild, untamed. Okay, this is how he talks about them. And the idea of lazy gluttons, lazy literally means idle, and gluttons means they are servants. This is really interesting. They're not servants of God, but they're servants, and gluttony doesn't have to do with food. Okay, it's an attitude, it's a passion, and the idea is they are servants of their own cravings. I think I have a better word for that. Yeah, I do. They are slaves to their own stomachs. Okay? They are servants of their own cravings. They are slaves to their own bodily drives, to themselves. They are trapped by themselves. That's the idea. They're lazy gluttons. Verses 11, 12. Okay? He moves into the next section. Okay? We've talked about, a quick recap, rebellious people, defined them a little bit. Then we talked about their actions. And again, moving very quickly, we looked at some of the things they're involved in. And again, it gives content. They're liars, evil brutes, and lazy gluttons. And it characterizes their actions. He continues in verses 13 and 14. Although we're moving quickly in this section, you're going to have time, of course, to discuss this within your small group or your Sunday school class, which is, again, very wise. Third section. The third part to these verses is the rectification. To rectify, to take care of the situation. And this centers in on verses 13 and 14. Get some really interesting advice here. After the quote of their own prophets, he says, this testimony is true. Okay? And when he's talking about a testimony, I'm going to write the whole sentence, or at least that part. The testimony is true, or truth. This is a witness, okay? Paul is affirming that, hey, that prophet spoke true, okay? It's a testimony, a witness to their actions. And when he says truth, he's going beyond facts. Truth is beyond facts. You can get into the Bible and learn all the facts and really not get into the truth of who he is. The enemy knows all kinds of facts about the Bible, but he doesn't know the truth. Okay? So when he's talking about, when he's talking about this prophet looking at that group of people, the prophet just wasn't talking about actions. One of their own prophets, okay? Prophets came from that area. Hey, it was not just about their actions. It was about the truth of the nature of who they were. Okay? Their testimony is true. Okay? He begins by saying this. Then he says, therefore, because we know that this testimony is true, okay, we should probably put maybe over here, therefore, okay, this shoots us on how to deal with them, which again is the rectification. Okay, this testimony is true. Therefore, and he says he writes to Titus, rebuke them, but it's not just rebuke them; it's rebuke them sharply. Rebuke them sharply. Now the idea of rebuke is interesting in and of itself without even adding the idea of sharply. The idea of rebuke literally means to correct. Or a better word is to convict. Apologize if you can't see my writing. Okay? The idea of rebuke is to correct or to convict. And the idea of, that rebuke has to do with, it is to point out error. Okay? Even to bring upon shame. Okay? There's to be shame. It is a correction or a conviction that says, hey, you've been wrong. And he adds on sharply here, and the idea of sharply is to cut. Okay? That's really what it means. In fact, I think I have it written down here for us. Sharply means in a manner that is cutting, or in a manner that cuts. What that word means, okay? The idea is you say this pointedly so they get the point, okay? Very, very pointedly to them. Hey, cut them. Hey, get this to them. Get it across so it brings about the conviction very, very sharply, okay? Now what's interesting is, and we have to learn this because, see, Paul is not just saying, hey, come down on them for the sake of coming down on them. He says, rebuke them sharply, and this is for a reason. He says, so that. In other words, there's reason for rebuking them sharply. So that, and he lists, they will be sound in the faith. Okay? They will be sound specifically about the faith. The idea of sound is the idea of healthy. Okay? They're going to be healthy. They're going to be the way that God has called them to be. That this kind of idea, conviction, is not bad because it brings us in line. It's healthy for us. When we live in sin, which we're never really should be living in sin, but you find yourself living in sin, conviction is a wonderful thing because it is to cut sharply to the point and bring us into a healthy aspect of faith. Okay? So let's write underneath here, healthy. Okay? They are to be sound in the faith. And then he says also, and I'll just recap this, I don't need to write this down. He says that they'll be sound in the faith, and they'll pay no attention to Jewish myths or to the commands of those who reject the truth. See, it's really interesting when he begins to talk about the deceivers, okay? When he begins to talk about, and he deals with this a lot in Galatians to some extent, I guess, but Paul is always running into, the nature of his ministry, he's running into the Jewish leadership of Israel, as Christ did, who are totally against Christianity, are very aggressively against the message. Paul at one time was caught up in that, seeking Christians, okay, to kill them and to stifle that message. But it's interesting, as Paul talks about them, he gives us insight. See, they are a specific aspect of these rebellious people, as we looked at earlier on in the passage. But specifically he says they are those who are not just missing the truth, but who are rejecting the truth. Plain, flat, will not listen to it. They're rejecting the truth. Okay? Got that? Now, the last section is in verses 15 and 16. The last little section of this lesson. Okay? Verse 4 is the recompense. I always fear I'm saying that word wrong. Verses 15 and 16. Okay? Now this is interesting because the idea is he has defined or given insight to the rebellious people. He's talked about their actions, which give us further insight to who they are. Then he's talked about how to very specifically deal with those people. And these are the benefits, okay? The rewards, the recompense. These are the outflows of that action towards those people. See, it's not, again, it's not just, hey, coming down on them for the sake of coming down on them. Hey, there will be rewards for doing so. Not only for the rebellious people, but for the entire body. Okay? The rectification of sin always helps the entire body. And he lists those for us. He begins in verse 15 by a statement I think is really interesting. Don't have time to fully exhaust this, but I'm sure you'll have time to talk about it amongst yourselves. He says, pure leads to pure. Now this is really interesting. Listen to how he says it. Verse 15. To the pure, all things are pure. Okay? Then he makes a contrast. But to those who are corrupted. Okay? To those who are corrupted, and that word corrupted is defiled. Jennifer Knapp sang a song with this in it, if you remember. Okay, to the pure, all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and believing nothing is pure. Yeah, she didn't come up with that. She got it from Titus. Okay, to the pure, all things are pure, but to those who are corrupted or defiled, nothing, or not one thing is pure. Okay, powerful. Put this together. He's talking about pure. He's not talking about deeds. The deeds are out there, okay? The deeds are done over here. This is talking about the nature of the individual and who they are, okay? To those who are pure, literally the idea of being in oneness with Christ and living for Him, being a child of God. To those who are pure, the idea of purity is uncorruptedness, okay? It's untainted. Those who are pure, everything that comes out of them are pure. Everything that comes out of them is pure. It's powerful. But to those who are corrupted, and the idea of corrupted is stained. Okay? It's the idea is stained. I've got a better one here. Contaminated, defiled. What's really interesting, I found this. This is what I was just looking for. It's to make common. One lexicon I looked up, which is a Greek tool, the idea of corrupted or defiled is to take from a sacred use to a common use. Okay? Take from a sacred to a common. It's all that Paul's talking about is sacred. It's serious business. I'm really into that. They take it as trivial. Again, it's a characteristic of who they are. They're mere talkers and deceivers. They run their mouth. Okay? They talk with their lips, but their life denies their lifestyle. Okay? They take it in a common, casual way. They're defiled. Okay? Listen to what he says, verse 15. To the pure all things are pure, but to those who are corrupted and do not believe, nothing is impure, or nothing is pure. Then he goes to this point. In fact, okay, affirming this, both their minds and consciences are corrupted. Okay? Stained, polluted. Both their minds and consciences are corrupted. They claim to know God on one hand, but by their actions they deny Him. They are, and he lists three things, and I'll list them for us. They are detestable, disobedient, and unfit for doing anything good. For the sake of time, I'll just read these. They are detestable, and the idea of detestable is carries with the idea of an abomination to God. It's just absolutely just repulsive to God. They are detestable. Disobedient, I thought was really neat. It's a it's a compound word, and it's a compound word meaning without. You have two words. One is without, and the other is persuasion. You can't persuade them. It's like, think of it this way. There's an individual over there, but there's one part missing to that individual. And the part missing is persuasion. They can't persuade them. They are absolutely unable to be deterred. Okay? That's the idea of being disobedient. Unwilling to be persuaded. And the last is unfit for doing anything good is they're worthless. They're worthless. They are absolutely worthless in who they are. Titus chapter 1, verses 10 through 16. Appreciate your time in this. Really want to encourage you to really saturate in this. And of course, do it outside of the classroom. Talk freely amongst your group. Study it together. Write some of these things down on a note card. Ask the Lord to give you insight. Appreciate your time.